Okay, and action. Welcome to 7 Blue Pixels, where you can unlock the secrets behind the amazing visuals you love in movies, TV shows and more. We'll break down the tools and techniques used by professionals, empowering you to create your own stunning visual effects and motion graphics. My name is Taylor DW, and in today's video we'll be using C4D and After Effects to make your own Borderlands film style titles. Borderlands game series is finally getting its own film after releasing their first game 15 years ago. Gearbox is still giving us big planets, bigger stories, and even bigger characters. Eli Roth is directing the feature film based on the game, and the titles released in the trailer and the posters is incredibly Borderlands, yet with its own spin away from the games. We'll be using C4D to make our own 3D titles, then using Insydium fused and X particles to make our liquid splashes, and then finally After Effects for compositing and bringing the animation together. However, the whole effect can be done in After Effects, and we'll go over that in part 2. So, without further ado, let's catch a ride! That might have been a bit much. So, first we need to actually make our titles. For Borderlands style titles, let's get that done. So we go into here, and we're going to go to text. And we're going to get our text, and I just want to make a few changes whilst I'm here. So I'm going to go into the main settings here, and I'm just going to increase the depth, just so we get something just a little bit more reactive when we put lighting in, and to make it feel like we've got a little bit more attitude to it, a little bit more Borderlands. We're going to then change this, so I'm just going to put tutorial for the sake of this. Okay, lovely. And I don't like how it's kind of shifting off there, so I'm just going to whack it into the middle, and that will just keep everything in our scene to the center, so I know exactly what's going on and exactly what to do. I'm just going to change the text to something a little bit kind of more appropriate to Borderlands. Heidenspfeiler? Forgive me on my pronunciation. That was actually awful. I'm just going to make a few changes here, so I'm going to maybe drop this down to maybe 140 or so, just so that it's not completely in our face and we've got a little bit more kind of wiggle room there. And I think I'm just going to have a look at the horizontal spacing. Yeah, maybe -2. The Borderlands titles tend to be very close together with their kerning, so yeah, let's go for that. That looks good to me. And I'm just going to change the intermediate points down here to uniform, and change that to 8. There we go. So now things are just a little bit more curved naturally. If we change that back to adaptive, see, it's nice and strict and edgy. But if we go to uniform, we just get a slight curve there, where things are just trying to be a little bit more uniform on the edges. And this just gives it a little kind of more natural, rough look for the Borderlands titles. So we just have to make a few more changes to this. So with the Borderlands, we naturally need to have the text angled. We're going to bring in a camera, but before we do that, we're just going to make sure our project settings are correct. So as always, I like to work in 25, and I'm going to leave it wide for now, but we can change it to vertical or kind of whatever you want. And I'm going to be working in redshift, so this is working great for me. I'm just going to press Ctrl D, and I'm just going to bring up this and change that to 25 frames as well. So now our timeline changes down the bottom. Let's increase this to 100 frames. So we've got 4 seconds here. Okay, so we need to bring in a camera, and with this camera I have some settings that I'd like to use. So I just want to zero all of this out. There we go. So now if we look through the camera, it's just going to look crazy. Yep. But this is where we can change a few things. So I want it on the X point, I want it to remain there. So, but on the Y, I want to increase it in height. So I'm going to raise it by 50. And that should kind of roughly split the difference. I know our text has got like 140 on the height. Yeah, but roughly that should bring it up nicely, especially with the camera angle. And I'm just going to drop the camera back, let's say, by 1,000. Okay, so now if we look through the camera, that's 10,000. Whoops. But 1,000. Okay, cool. We have our titles. Maybe we can go a little bit closer, something like that. So we click into here and we just go divided by 2. Okay, cool. So that's looking good for me. So now we have a camera in place. I'm just going to right click this and I'm going to type protect. In the rigging tags, we're going to put a protection tag on it. And this will stop us accidentally moving the camera at any point. I'm just going to hide it from view so we get rid of those outlines. So I'm going to go into the coordinates here, and I realized that the Borderlands titles, the titles tend to not quite always be in your face. There's always a little bit of an angle to them, right? So I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to change this to -10, just so that it kind of comes up out to the camera. Okay, that's looking nice. We look back through the camera view again. Yeah, I want to get a few more details on this text because I want to make sure I can get the textures and everything. So we've done our object tab and we've done our coordinates. We're going to go into caps. So I just want to change a few things here. So if we press NB and we have a look at our faces here, we can see that we've got really big, lovely n-gons, but we don't want the n-gons. We want something a little bit more detailed than that. So I'm going to go into the tessellation and change it to regular grid. Okay, so as you can see, things are looking a little crazy at the moment. We've got triangles instead of quads, etc. And it's not the worst thing in the world because we're not doing too much with it, you know, but we just want something a little bit tidier. So I'm going to drop the size down to about 2 centimeters. Okay, so now this is looking really intense, but when it comes to a few particle simulation stuff later on, we're able to get those faces on the back and we're able to kind of get like a strong collision from it. You can change it to quad dominant, changes the text slightly, but it should be alright. We can maybe increase this up a little bit, perhaps we don't need as many faces. Let's maybe go 3.5. 4. We're going to have a look at the bevel, and this is partly why we changed this here as well. So go back to NA, and we've got our normal shading here. If we go to our bevel, and let's increase this to 2 centimeters. As you can see, this is already looking quite more interesting. You can see how the light's going to react to that. So we're going to keep the subdivisions for 3. And we're going to keep the tension 100%. And this should just give us a nice edging, but also we can now isolate that edging. So if we go over to selections, we can now hit the shell. And we can also select the start bevel, which is R1. And you can see we've got our selection points up here. So just to give an example of what this does, if I just make 2 random materials, and let's make one bright red, and we'll make the other one bright yellow. Okay. Oh, there we go. Bright red. So if we put this one on here and this one on here, all it's done is turn the entire thing yellow, and that's not what we're looking for at all. That's nowhere near what we're looking for. How do we fix this? Simply what we do is in our selection point here, we're just going to bring down the R1 selection. And as you can see now, we're able to isolate the beveled edges with our main color. Now obviously the red might be a bit too much here. So let's maybe drop that down into like a dark red just for purpose sake. And then from here, let's maybe just go slightly more complementary yellow / orange. So if we go back to our camera, you can see how this is working. And this is starting to pull together a lot better. So I'm just going to add a few lights in here just so that we can work out what's going on. I'm just going to go into here and I'm just going to grab an infinity light. And what this does, it will just give it a really nice general feeling across the entire piece. So let's go down to here and we go 3 intensity. So now we've got like that kind of somewhat diffused look where the title's able to stand out on its own. But we're also going to give it just a little bit of definition. And that's because we want a little bit of backlighting with this. So we're going to come out of the camera view and we're going to get an area light. And as you can see, if we bring up our redshift render view and we dock it to the side here, whoop, there we go. This area light is far too much, not what we want. What we want to do is point it to the back. So we're going to bring it to the back here. Go to change to our rotation tool and holding shift, we're able to turn it 180 degrees. Now from here, I'm just going to flatten it out and I'm going to stretch it all the way out. Just so that it goes a little bit beyond the words and at the same time backlights all of it. I'm just going to raise it up a little bit. Perfect. So if we look at our tutorial here, it's starting a little bit Marvel-esque, I'll be honest. But let's drop this down. So let's drop this down to say 1. Okay, so now if I raise it back up, you can see that we've got all this bright light on the outside here. But if we drop this down to 1, we're just getting just a little bit of emphasis on the depth here. And we want to just re-emphasize a few bits. So let's maybe just, you know, change it to a color that's somewhat complementary to the original depth. And as you can see already, we've got something a little bit more interesting. We've got something that is able to kind of stand out on its own whilst also differentiating itself from its background. We can, of course, just bring this out a little bit if you wanted, and we can give it that full look to it. But this comes down to creative preferences and what references you're using. We can now look at how we're going to use Insydium to build some water splashes. So the best way I found to do this, and feel free to leave it in the comments if you found any other way to go about doing this, is I'm going to be using X particles and the Nexus system. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this into a connect object by holding Alt as I click on it. Automatically puts the text as a child of the connect. But as you can see, we've lost our bevel, texture bevel. But that's fine, because when it comes to actual rendering, we're going to turn that off. But for now, we're going to use this as one object, and we're going to go to extensions, Insydium tags, and collider. We're just going to put a collider on it. So now this turns it into one big object for our X particle systems to bounce off. So let's go through the basic setup of what I did, and then if and when you have Insydium, you're able to go through and manipulate and change any of the settings that you want for your own creative decision. So we go into Insydium, X particles, and system. I love using the system because it keeps it really nice and organized, and that's exactly what I'm looking for today. So we go into our emitter, we go object, and I'm just going to change this to a circle. And from here, I'm just going to drag it to the back. And if I hit play, you can see that everything is emitting out. It's emitting where that blue line is here. So that's Z+. I want it to go towards the letters, so we're going to emit everything to Z-. Perfect. And you can already see that the collision tag is working here. That's, you know, it's stopping things kind of just going through and clipping through, but also allowing it to go through the holes of the gaps of the text. So we can already see roughly what we're getting here, which is I mean, you know, you could play around with those settings already and be fairly happy with it. So I'm going to change a few things just because I'm not quite happy with it. But we can see how this goes. So I'm just going to bring this emitter down in scale, and I'm going to bring it up a little bit. Okay. We go again. Now all my particles are shooting straight for that O and the R. I'm going to go into my emitter settings. I'm going to change my emission to shot. I'm going to perhaps increase this to 4,000 or so. And the duration I'm going to put as 2 frames. So it's effectively emitting 8,000. So if we go again. And as you can see what happens there. So it emits as one big gloop. And then as it hits the collider then changes all these settings based on what's going on. We can then change additional settings on the collider, including our bounce. We can maybe drop down, we can maybe increase our scatter a little bit, and we can also change the variance of these things as well. So, for example, it doesn't quite bounce away as much, but they do break apart a little bit more, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to leave this on the default settings for now, just for the purpose of the tutorial. I'm going to change this to 200, and I'm going to put our radius down to something like 0.5. Okay, so each one of these little spheres represents the radius, and obviously the speed is the speed. So if we go again, and look at that, we're getting far more coming through, and it's almost taking the shape of it. So you can see what we're getting at here. We're trying to build those splashes that come with the titles. Now, for me, the titles for the Borderlands film don't go through the text, but my ones do go through the text, and I really like that level of manipulation. So that's what we're just going through today. So I'm going to go up into Nexus, and I'm going to get Nexus Fluids, and I'm going to change this to SPH, just because that's my preferred calculation. And I'm just going to increase the viscosity up to 100. Now, this is what we'll do. If we go again, it'll take a little second just to calculate. But as you can see, things are now starting to clump together. There's a little bit more density to the text, and we're starting to actually get those splashes. If you have a look at the Borderlands titles on the trailer, things are a little bit more gloopy, a little bit more kind of slimed, and I think it's meant to kind of almost represent that kind of thick blood and everything else. So yeah, we're starting to get that look. Some of these particles are already clumping together. So we're going to go into Nexus again, and we're going to get an NX constraints. Now this is where it gets interesting. So we're going to basically constrain these together. So if I go into the emitter and I go to display, we're going to click on display constraints, and this will help demonstrate what is happening here. So we're going to connect from birth. So they're all going to be connected immediately as they are born from the emitter. I'm going to drop the connection limit down to 5, so they can only kind of connect to the 5 around them at any one point. I'm going to drop the search radius, of which they can find one, about 25 centimeters. I'm going to drop the stiffness down to 20, so this will allow them to kind of maneuver about a little bit more fluid. Increase the brake up to 100%. Okay, they're just kind of personal preferences, what I found worked for me during one of my kind of gloopy particle renders, but obviously this is all down to personal taste and everything else. So we can go through and hit play and give it a second, and already you can see what's happening. So these yellow lines are our constraints, and they are doing their best to hold our gloop together. And already, if we look at it from the camera perspective and we play it again, you can already see what's happening, and that's already looking great, especially the way it just goes straight past the camera. And you can see the constraints. What they do is that they are holding these particles together as they go through the gaps in these letters. So let's try and manipulate this a little bit further. I'm going to go into Nexus, and I'm going to get a Nexus turbulence. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to change the noise type to turbulence. I'm going to increase the strength to, say, 15. And I'm kind of going to leave the rest as defaults for now, just to see what we're getting. So if we hit play again, great. So now even at the back here, we're getting more changes, more variants, and as they go through, they're moving a little bit better. If we watch this section here, they're moving through the air as if they're actually being affected by drag and everything else. And that's just going to make it, when we go to render here, a lot more interesting, especially as they kind of find more motion going in and towards the camera. Now, obviously, you can increase the emission amount, you can change the viscosity, you can increase the amount of constraints. So let's do a connection limit of 10, let's increase the radius by 50, you know, and we see what result we get here. So now we're getting even bigger gloops, and we're getting even bigger breaks at the back. It might be more of an interesting look. And then what we can do is, because we might have many of these, is that we can put these in a group. We go create and add group. Perfect. I want a few more of these, so I'm going to click and control and drag, or command and drag. And in the particle group, it will have all our settings here, including our display settings. Then what I can do is, if these are all part of group 1, I can go into groups affected and just change and add the particle group to these. So then I can have even more of these and even more settings in the same system and generate different forms of particles. So if I go to the camera view now and I press play, look at that, it's taking a little bit slower, but wow, the amount of slime and everything, and it's still rendering somewhat fast. Just coming through, working off the GPU. Here we go. And that's just looking great. That looks like something's been shot from the back and it's just bursting through. And it's just really interesting. And of course, you can then add wind modifiers, change the direction, change the speed, whatever it is you're after. But I think these are looking great as they are. So how do we turn that into something that we can use to render? So we're going to mesh this out. So we're going to go into generators. We're going to go to generator and open VDB mesher. Drag our emissions into here, and already you can see what it's doing. Already you can see that it's just turned it into this crazy looking mesh. But we need to sort this out because obviously these are far too big and they're starting to clip through our actual collision data, and we don't want that. We're going to go into here and we're going to drop the voxel size down to say 1. Okay, and this just make it a lot cleaner, a lot nicer and everything else. But we still want something somewhat thick, but we don't want it blobby like this. So I'm going to drop this down to something like 3. And already we can see that things are just looking so much better. Nothing's kind of really clipping through our collision data. Everything's looking nice, you know, and as it's coming towards the camera, we're not really going to see that it's too static. And if you wanted to, you can add, you know, modifiers or, you know, subdivisions or whatever. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into the filters. And we're just going to add a filter. And we're going to take the median filter off. And we're going to add a Gaussian. And in the Gaussian, we're just going to drop the strength down to about 50 or so. Maybe even 20. And all it does is just try and bring in those harsh edges. And that's all we're looking for at this point. And then we're going to go into our OpenVD mesher. And we are going to get a smooth. And if we hold shift, it puts it as a child, which is exactly what we're looking for. And as you can see already, this is now looking as more splashes. And it's just looking more crazy. And I think when it comes to Borderlands, the crazier the better. Now you could just drop the strength down to 50, try and get a little bit more kind of detail back, maybe change the stiffness. Obviously the iterations depends on how detailed it is, but even if you just drop the strength a bit, you know, let's say like 40%, I mean already we're getting something that's looking absolutely crazy here. And you can make as many of these as you want and just render them out at different points. What I did was I rendered them, I turned them all into Alembic data, and then I was able to speed up my render from that because I wasn't relying on any kind of cached protocols or anything anymore. It was all kind of just one baked Alembic, and I was able to then texture it and maneuver it how I wanted. So what happens when we are happy with this? So we're going to go into utilities and we're going to hit cache. So for now, I'm going to put this onto internal memory. But for you, you could do external memory, put it into a file, etc, etc. And I'd recommend that you do it as external memory so that you can always go back to it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to hit build cache. And look at that, for 100 frames, for the 3 particle effects that we did, including our VDB mesher, it's taken less than a minute to cache those particles. So we'll come back when it's done. So now we're back, you can see everything's cached with this red box here. They look like kind of little server points. And if we play it through, sometimes the viewport display doesn't keep up. But if we just go through, we can see it actually all in place, which is great. So if we go to our Redshift render view, we go over to here, Redshift camera, and then let's go in, make a new material, and let's make something just a little kind of more fluidy. Let's maybe let's bring down the roughness, you know, try and make it a little bit kind of more, just I guess a little bit more painty in its approach. And we whacked that on the VDB mesher. And look at that already, everything's looking great there. And if we just, let's go like maybe 1 second in, and you can already see it's all coming together, and that's looking nice. And you can add depth of field, you could do what you want. But now it's cached, we can go back into our connect object and turn that off. And we've got our bevel back. This is all looking good to render. So then we go into our render settings, and we're going to go to Redshift, we're going to go to Advanced, I'm just going to change a few settings here. So you can change progressive passes however you want. Sometimes that's nice to drop down further if you're using still images, but for motion, especially if it's gone on social, I find it's not the end of the world. Globals, we could change all this, especially if you put actual liquid textures on anything. You'll want that kind of nice reflections or refractions, depending on your style and how you want to go about it. This is where I'll change this to brute force, and I normally just times this by 4, just so that I'm kind of getting enough, but it doesn't slow the render down too much. And then AOVs, we're going to go to show AOV manager. And then what we're going to do over here, before we do anything else, is that we're going to go back into our lights. We're going to go details, and we're going to add these into new light groups. So this would be at infinity, and this will be our area. And of course, you can add more lights. That's no bother. But this is what we're doing for now. So we're going to add a beauty pass. And in the beauty pass, we're going to add all light groups. So what this does, if I show you in the render at the top here, we can change it to just our area light and just our infinity light. And this gives us more control in the compositing stages over how we want things to look and how we want things to interact. So obviously we just then add what we want from our AOVs and how we're going to manipulate them. But I also always suggest a crypto matte. Now what a crypto matte does is that it separates every single object into its own color. And sometimes this is really helpful, especially if puzzle mats are getting a little bit too complicated, or you're just looking for something in particular. For example, if we're looking to isolate these particles on our own, we're able to use the crypto matte to be able to do that. It's my preferred way of working. It's not the best and it's not the worst, it's just my preferred way. As we all know, there's 1,000,001 ways to do the same thing when it comes to motion design. Find what works for you and use that. So you build out your AOV manager, and you want to make sure that you got all your settings all looking nice here. I'd perhaps increase this to like a full 1080, you know, so let's just maybe do that now. There we go. And let's just bring that back to a beauty pass, and we just turn the bucket rendering off for now. I would perhaps increase the resolution to maybe 144, something like that. I think for video, especially like I said, when it goes into motion design, I wouldn't go any higher than that. But if you're doing a still image, 300 is like your default. And then obviously we want to change this to all frames available. If you want, you can add a magic bullet looks, or you can add more render settings, or, you know, add more effects. Entirely up to you. You know, you can then go into the X particle settings and try and change it manually, etc, etc. But it's not necessarily needed. What you can do, especially using Redshift, is that you can go into the emitter and you can go render tags, Redshift object, particles, and change these into sphere particles. And then we can, because they're showing in render still, what you'll be able to see here, if we just crop this a little bit just so that we have focus, you're able to see these little blue dots, and they're your particles. And then we can go in and we can just scale multiply them up if we need, and you can bring back some of your particles if you wanted. And you can also then divide them into a puzzle mat using the object ID, etc, etc. But sometimes just putting them into a mesh is nice enough as it is. But if you wanted to build foam or that kind of stuff, it's a nice way of rendering those out. So I'll see you guys in part 2, where we look into how we're going to composite this, but also start off on how we would build this in After Effects as a default. See you then. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Please comment if you found any other way that you prefer doing things, and I'll see you again.